Chief Douglas had it all. 3 wives, unimaginable wealth, sprawling estates, and booming businesses, all in their names. But when he faked a terminal illness to test their love, what he uncovered would shatter even the strongest heart. Who do you think stayed by his side? And who began fighting over his inheritance while he was still breathing? Watch till the very end, because this story will leave you speechless. The rain tapped gently on the glass windows of Chief Douglas's mansion, a quiet rhythm that mirrored the weight in his heart. He sat alone in his study, staring at a dusty family portrait on his mahogany desk. His once sharp eyes had dulled with age, but something deeper than time was eating at him. Doubt. The photo showed him standing tall, arms around 3 beautiful women, his wives. Beside them were the children they bore him, the legacy he'd worked a lifetime to build. Ruth, his first wife, the mother of his 3 daughters, the woman who stood beside him when all he had was a vision and an empty pocket. She sold Puff Puff in the streets while he ran errands and fixed broken engines in people's compounds. Then came Lillian, elegant, sharp, calculating. She gave him 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. She came into his life when the money began to flow. She was a woman of class and had helped manage parts of his growing empire. She knew paperwork better than emotions. Lastly, there was Nancy, young, beautiful, his favorite. She had no child yet, but she had something the others didn't: youth, beauty, and the power to silence a room with her presence. Everyone knew she was his jewel, the one he protected the most, the one he showered with diamonds, cars, and private island vacations. But now something inside him stirred. Which of them truly loves me? Not the power, not the money. Just me. He had just returned from a medical checkup a week ago. The doctor said he was fine for his age, only minor fatigue. But fatigue wasn't what kept him awake at night. It was fear. The fear that he was surrounded by people who smiled for his money, but not for his soul. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling, breathing deeply. If I were dying, who would sit by me? He didn't want to wait till the day he truly fell ill to find out. He had seen too many rich friends close their eyes in death, surrounded not by love, but by vultures, children and wives, fighting over bank accounts before the corpse turned cold. I need to know, he muttered. And that night, as thunder rolled softly outside, Chief Douglas picked up his phone and dialed a number he had trusted for years. Barrister Williams, are you awake? He asked when the call connected. Yes, sir. Is everything all right? Douglas looked at the family photo again, then turned it face down. No, it's not. I need your help. I want to pretend I'm dying. Barrister Williams didn't speak immediately. On the other end of the line, he sat upright in bed, confused and slightly alarmed. Sir, did I hear you correctly? He finally asked. Yes. Chief Douglas replied firmly. I want to pretend I'm dying. I need to know who truly loves me in this house. My wives, my children, everyone. I've given too much, and I don't want to die a fool. Barrister Williams sighed. Chief, this is not a small move. You're talking about faking a terminal illness. What if I really died, not knowing who was genuine? Douglas interrupted. His voice was heavy, tired, but resolute. The lawyer paused, then said softly, Okay, if you're sure, let me come over tomorrow morning. We'll plan it carefully. Douglas hung up and sat in silence. The next day, Barrister Williams arrived with documents and ideas. He brought along Dr. Philip, Chief Douglas's personal physician, a man whose loyalty had been proven over decades. They met in the private study. Ruth had gone to the market. Lillian was at the company. Nancy was at the salon. We'll say you have late-stage organ failure, Dr. Philip explained gently. A slow decline, 6 months at most. You'll stay indoors, grow pale, pretend to cough, refuse food. I'll come regularly and monitor you. Chief Douglas nodded slowly. "What about the money?" he asked. Barrister Williams leaned forward. "We must protect it. Let me quietly move most of your assets into a new account. Your will. We'll revise it secretly. That way, if anyone starts showing their true colors, they'll be exposed." Douglas's eyes glinted for the first time in weeks. "Good. And install cameras in my bedroom. I want to see and hear everything." "Understood." By the time the meeting ended, the plan was solid. That evening, Douglas called a family meeting in the main lounge. He sat on a couch with a tired face, wearing a wrapper and clutching his chest. His wife sat facing him. Dr. Phillips stood beside him and gave the announcement with a carefully rehearsed sadness. "Chief Douglas has been diagnosed with a critical condition. His organs are failing. It's irreversible. He has at most 6 months." Gasps echoed across the room. Nancy dropped her phone dramatically. "6 what?" Lillian blinked, her arms folded. Ruth froze, then immediately stood up and knelt beside her husband. "No, my God, no, please," she cried. "Douglas, talk to me." Chief Douglas looked weak, frail, silent, but inside he was watching. The test had begun. The mansion, once full of laughter, quiet footsteps, and the sound of clinking wine glasses, now felt like a hospital ward. Everyone walked slower, spoke softer, but only for a while. After the diagnosis, the entire household had paused. The staff whispered in corners. The wives wore grim faces. Some even cried. Chief Douglas stayed in his room, curtains drawn, acting weaker each day. He refused food, coughed loudly, groaned softly, and Dr. Phillip kept the act alive with weekly visits and somber warnings. "His organs are failing steadily," the doctor would say, shaking his head. "Prepare yourselves. It could be weeks, maybe less." Ruth became a shadow in her husband's room. She would sit by his side, read psalms, wipe his forehead, and sometimes cry into the blanket when she thought he was asleep. "You're not leaving me," she whispered one night, resting her head on his chest. "We haven't even held our grandchildren together." Douglas's throat tightened, but he couldn't break character. Meanwhile, Lillian had already started making calls. She met quietly with one of the company accountants, whispering about ownership rights and legal transitions. "Chief can't make decisions anymore," she said coolly, her nails tapping the table. "The company must not collapse because of emotions. I'll need access to the accounts and a seat at the board immediately." The accountant blinked. "But Chief didn't authorize that. Do you want to be jobless when he's gone?" she replied. At home, she barely visited his room. Once Ruth begged her. "He asked after you yesterday. Can't you just come see him?" Lillian smiled faintly. "What would I do there? Stare at him coughing? I have more important things to do." Nancy, on the other hand, posted a black and white picture of Chief Douglas on her Instagram with the caption, "The strongest man I know, pray for him." She got hundreds of comments and sympathy messages. Some even called her the best wife ever. But in reality, she hadn't stepped into his room in 4 days. She told the cook, "That room smells like medicine and sadness. I can't take it, it makes me dizzy." Instead, she spent time in the garden taking selfies, watching movies in the master lounge, and texting someone named Khalid every night. Chief Douglas saw it all, from his hidden cameras. He listened, he watched, and slowly his heart began to close. Not from illness, but from disappointment. But one night something happened that made him cry for real. Something Ruth did. Something none of the other wives could ever fake. It was just past midnight. The entire mansion was silent, except for the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft hum of the night breeze. Chief Douglas lay still on his large bed, pretending to sleep. His back ached from the stillness, but his heart ached more from what he had been discovering. The hidden cameras, the secret recordings, the neglect, the cold conversations about property, the giggles between Nancy and someone called Khalid. It hurt. But tonight, something different happened. Ruth tiptoed into the room, holding a small wooden stool and a Bible in one hand, and a flask of hot water in the other. She gently set the items down, checked his forehead, then sat beside his bed on the stool. She didn't know he was awake. He kept his eyes closed. She placed a hand on his chest, bowed her head, and began to whisper, "Father, I know you see my husband. You see what the doctor said. But I also know you're the final say. Please, heal him. Restore his strength." Her voice trembled. "We've been through so much, Lord. We've slept on bare floors. We've fasted just to afford one meal. We've stood at crusades holding hands, asking you to lift us. And you did, Lord. You lifted us. Please don't take him from me now." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Chief Douglas, still pretending to sleep, felt one drop fall on his wrist. She held his hand tightly. "Even if he forgets everything we've been through, I haven't. Even if others see an old dying man, I still see the young hustler who told me, 'We'll make it, Ruth.' And we did." She paused, sniffled quietly, and then leaned close to his ear. "And if this is really the end, my love, I just want you to know I'll be by your side. Not because of what you gave me, but because of what we built together." She kissed his forehead, stood up, and carefully covered him with the thick blanket. Then she turned to the wall, knelt down, and began to pray again. Chief Douglas opened his eyes slowly, just a little, tears welling. That was no performance. That was no strategy. That was love, the kind he hadn't seen in years. As Ruth whispered her final amen, stood up, and quietly walked out of the room, Douglas turned his head toward the door she exited from, and exhaled. Deeply, not a cough, a release. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty room. "At least one of you still loves me." But downstairs, Lillian was planning something, and Nancy had just returned from somewhere she shouldn't have been. The next morning, the mansion's kitchen buzzed as breakfast was prepared. But upstairs, Chief Douglas remained in bed, feigning weakness while his eyes scanned the hidden camera screen on the small tablet beside him. He had seen Ruth's midnight prayer. It still played in his heart like a song. But today, his attention was on his second wife, Lillian. At 9 a.m. sharp, she stepped into his private study, the one he hadn't entered in weeks. She wore a navy blue blazer and skirt, heels clicking confidently against the tiled floor. In her hand, a sleek file folder. She didn't know the camera above the bookshelf had been repositioned 2 days ago. She sat, dialed a number, and spoke quietly. "Yes, Barrister James. The man is wasting away. We don't have 6 months. We may not even have 3. If we wait for a will, we'll all lose everything." She paused, then flipped a document open. "Listen, I've already started compiling a list of the key properties. If you can get the trustees to release the business shares early, we can shift control before the vultures outside start circling. I'll handle the household." Her voice was calm, professional, cold. Chief Douglas blinked. His own wife. Plotting transfer of shares while he pretended to be dying? The man she used to call my lion? He swallowed a lump in his throat and listened. Then, just as she hung up, a loud giggle echoed from outside. It was Nancy. She waltzed into the compound wearing a tight black gown, phone in hand, whispering and laughing with someone. Douglas zoomed in on the garden camera. She was walking toward the pool, but stopped near the guest house, the one they barely used. Moments later, a tall man in sunglasses stepped out from behind the wall. Douglas's eyes narrowed. Nancy ran up to him and gave him a quick hug. Not a cousin's hug, not a friend's. Something else. She handed him a gift bag and whispered something into his ear. The man, muscular, stylish, grinned and leaned in too close. Then they both laughed. Douglas clenched his jaw. His favorite wife, the one he spoiled the most. She hadn't visited his room in 4 days. But here she was, sneaking around the house like a teenager, hiding a relationship while her husband died upstairs. And Ruth? Ruth was back in the kitchen, asking the cook if she could prepare yam porridge because that used to be his favorite meal when he was tired. Douglas placed the tablet down slowly. The screen dimmed. He looked out the window. This wasn't just a test anymore. It was becoming a funeral for his faith in love. And soon, he'd start preparing his real will. Chief Douglas no longer needed more proof. His eyes had seen enough. His ears had heard even more. The pain in his chest wasn't from illness, but from the slow unraveling of the people he once called family. Ruth remained his only comfort, quietly faithful, quietly consistent. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the compound walls, Douglas picked up his phone and dialed the only person who hadn't failed him in all these years. "Williams," he said, his voice low. "Come to the house tonight and bring the documents." By 8 p.m., Barrister Williams arrived with a brown leather case and a look of concern. He met Chief Douglas in his room, where the air was thick with silence. Ruth had just stepped out to boil water for his sponge bath. "It's time," Douglas said. "Time for what, Chief?" "To rewrite everything. My will, my succession plan, my legacy. All of it." Barrister Williams hesitated. "Are you sure? What about—" "No." Douglas cut him off. "Listen to me. I've been watching them through hidden cameras in this house. I know everything. Lillian is already trying to take over my business. And Nancy, she's cheating on me with a boy she sneaks into the compound." The lawyer blinked, stunned. "And Ruth?" he asked quietly. Douglas paused, and for a brief moment, a rare smile touched his face. "Ruth," he said, "is the only one who still prays for me like we're still in a one-room apartment. She remembers who I was before I became Chief Douglas. And she's the only one who hasn't asked a single question about property or inheritance." Barrister Williams opened the case and pulled out a blank will. "Then let's do it," he said firmly. For the next hour they sat together crafting a new document, one that would change the lives of everyone under that roof. The bulk of the estates, the controlling shares of the company, the 2 largest houses, the private pension accounts, the hotel in Lekki, the farmland in Enugu, all of it, signed over to Ruth and her children. Lillian and Nancy were left with nothing, except one line each. To those who showed concern only when wealth seemed near its end, let this be a lesson. Love cannot be bought with diamonds, nor loyalty measured by designer bags. When the document was signed, sealed, and stamped, Chief Douglas looked Barrister Williams in the eye. "Now," he said, "let them continue. I won't stop the show. In fact, I'll record the final act myself." He tapped the hidden camera app and enabled audio syncing across all rooms. The game wasn't over. It had just entered the final stage. The morning air was calm, but tension was building inside the mansion like a ticking clock. Ruth walked slowly down the hallway, holding a bowl of pap. She'd blended it herself just the way Douglas used to like it. But her face was tired. Not from the cooking, from something else. Last night she had heard whispers near the guest house. Laughs. A male voice. Then a door quietly closing. It wasn't the first time. She had ignored it at first, but her spirit wouldn't let her rest. The following morning she asked the security man, "Did Madam Nancy go out last night?" The man blinked, unsure, then nodded. "Yes, Ma, but she wasn't alone. A young man followed her into the guest quarters. We thought Chief had sent for someone." Ruth said nothing. She walked away, but something inside her snapped. Later that day, while Nancy was seated on the veranda, scrolling through her phone and sipping orange juice, Ruth approached, quietly but firmly. "Nancy, we need to talk." Nancy looked up, her long lashes fluttering. "Talk about what?" she said with a sigh. "About the strange man you've been sneaking into the compound at night." Nancy's face stiffened. She glanced around, then laughed. "What man?" she said. "Auntie Ruth, are you okay? You're starting to sound like those village women with too much time." Ruth didn't flinch. "He was here last night. You hugged him near the guest house. My eyes may be old, but they still see. Nancy rolled her eyes and stood up. So what if someone came to visit me? I need companionship, too. You think I should rot in that room crying over a man who's already halfway in the grave? Ruth stared at her in disbelief. He's your husband, Nancy. Nancy scoffed. Oh, please. Your husband, not mine. Let's not pretend here, Mama Ruth. You think we married him out of love? We married him because he had money. You got lucky. But me, I'm young. I have a life to live. Ruth's voice cracked. So that's it? You're already replacing him while he's still breathing? Nancy leaned close and whispered, He won't even last another month. You'll see. When it's all over, I'll still be young, rich, and free. She walked off with a sway in her step, humming as she re-entered the house. Ruth stood frozen. What she had just heard was beyond wickedness. It was cruelty. She turned and walked away, heart broken anew. But what neither of them knew, Chief Douglas had watched and listened to everything from his room, and he had heard every word. This wasn't just about disappointment anymore. It was about justice, and it was coming. 3 days later, the tall glass doors of Douglas Holdings swung open at exactly 9 a.m. Franklin, Chief Douglas's eldest son from his second wife, Lillian, strutted into the boardroom like he owned the place. Behind him walked Madame Lillian herself, dressed in her sharpest gray suit, lips painted blood red, face unreadable. 12 board members sat around the long oval table, whispering as they stood and greeted her. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said coolly, taking her seat at the head of the table. The seat that once belonged to Chief Douglas. Franklin stood beside her like a loyal soldier. "As you all know," Lillian began, "Chief Douglas is gravely ill. He can no longer fulfill his duties as chairman. But this company must survive. In the spirit of continuity and family strength, I will be stepping in as acting chairperson until a new structure is formalized." There was a long pause. One of the older board members, Mr. Adesina, cleared his throat and said, "Madam, with all due respect, Chief Douglas has not handed over, nor has he issued a resignation, until we hear from him directly." Franklin slammed his palm on the table. "My father can barely speak. He doesn't need to hand over anything. This company was built for his family, and we, his family, are now taking responsibility." Lillian nodded. "We will circulate the updated control documents by close of business today. Also, we are introducing new consultants and accountants to review current expenditures and redirect funds to more aggressive investments." The room fell into murmurs. At the back of the room, the head of legal, Mr. Hemba, stood up slowly. "But Ma, are these changes backed by any legal authorization from the chief?" Lillian gave a short, practiced smile. "Everything will be in order. Trust me." But trust had already left the room. Back at the mansion, Ruth had heard whispers of this meeting. The house staff were talking. Even Franklin's voice had echoed through the hallway the night before, as he boasted to a friend on the phone, "Once Mum sits in that chair, no one's removing us. The company is already ours." Inside his bedroom, Chief Douglas watched the live feed from the office camera. He saw the smirks, the fake nods, the signatures being gathered. He looked away for a moment and closed his eyes. "Let them dig the hole," he muttered. "I'll be there when they fall into it." He picked up his phone and sent one message to Barrister Williams. "Stage 2 begins tomorrow. Prepare the staff." Because soon everyone would know. Chief Douglas was never dying. He was only watching. It was a rainy afternoon when Ruth decided to do a deep clean of Chief Douglas's room. He had grown even quieter in the past 2 days, speaking only when necessary, coughing less but still pretending to be weak. She thought it meant he was getting worse, but he simply watched more and said less. As Ruth folded his blankets and arranged the books on his nightstand, something strange caught her eye. A blinking blue light just behind the curtain rail. She squinted. It looked like a tiny lens. A camera? She slowly walked toward it, climbed onto a footstool and reached up. It wasn't visible at first glance, but now that she was closer, she saw it clearly. Tucked neatly in a small casing, with a tiny power cable running behind the curtain. Her heart skipped. She climbed down and began to look around the room more carefully, and found another tiny device behind the flower vase near the bed. Then one more near the bookshelf. "This can't be," she whispered. Just then Chief Douglas stirred and opened his eyes slowly. "Ruth!" he called in a raspy voice. She rushed over. "Are you okay? I was just cleaning and—" "You found them, didn't you?" he said, eyes calm but sharp. She froze. "You knew." He nodded slowly and gestured toward the chair beside the bed. "Sit. There's something I need to tell you." Ruth sat, confusion and concern dancing in her eyes. Chief Douglas took a deep breath. "I'm not sick, Ruth. I never was." Ruth blinked fast, not understanding. "What?" "I pretended," he said. "To test you. To test all of you. The doctor is in on it. So is my lawyer. Only 2 people in this house will leave with their dignity when this is over. You. And me." Ruth's lips trembled. "You're not dying?" He reached for her hand. "No. And I've seen it all. Lillian's boardroom betrayal, Nancy's secret lover, even Franklin and his loud mouth. But you stayed. You prayed. You fed me. You wiped my tears." Ruth's eyes welled up. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're the only one I couldn't afford to lose. I had to know if your love was still real, after all these years." She covered her mouth with both hands, crying softly. "So what now?" Douglas leaned back. "Now. I stopped pretending. But not today. First, I want them to see what I've seen. I want them to watch themselves. Through my eyes." He looked at her, a tear forming. "You are my legacy, Ruth. Not the buildings, not the money. You." And for the first time since the plan began, he cried openly. Not from sadness, but because he knew he had not been completely alone. The grand living room of Chief Douglas's mansion had never been this tense. Everyone was seated, Lillian in her usual sharp suit, legs crossed, clutching her phone. Nancy scrolling mindlessly through Instagram with fake concern plastered on her face. Franklin slouched, clearly annoyed, and 2 of Douglas's grown children whispering to each other, trying to look unaffected. Ruth sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap. Calm, but her heart pounded. Only she knew what was coming. Then Chief Douglas appeared, slowly, with no walking stick, no help, no weakness in his step. The room gasped. Nancy's phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. Lillian blinked, frozen. You're walking?" Franklin stammered. Douglas looked at them all, his face unreadable. "Sit still," he said with a calm so cold, even the AC felt warm. He walked to the center of the room and pointed at the large flat-screen television. Barrister Williams stood beside it, holding a flash drive. "Today," Douglas said, "you will see what I saw, you will hear what I heard, and you will know what it feels like to be dead while still breathing." With a nod from Douglas, Barrister Williams plugged in the flash drive and pressed play. The first clip showed Nancy, laughing with her mystery lover in the garden. The camera zoomed in on the hug, the whisper, the kiss on the cheek. Nancy gasped, covering her mouth. "I can explain—" "Don't bother," Douglas said without even looking at her. Next, a clip from the boardroom. Lillian sat at the head of the table. "We can't wait for him to die. The company needs a new face," one board member protested. Franklin shouted. "He's as good as gone. Let's just take over already." Silence filled the room. Lillian looked like she'd seen a ghost. Then came footage of Nancy again, mocking Ruth's devotion in the hallway. "You think I should be wiping his sick mouth for love? I married a bank account, not a corpse." Nancy began to cry. Lillian stood up. "Enough of this," she snapped. "Sit down," Douglas barked. The voice was back. The lion had returned. She sank slowly back into the couch, humiliated. He walked toward them, staring each one in the eye. You sold me out before I even took my last breath. You mocked me, betrayed me, laughed at my grave while I was still alive. You wanted my company, my land, my wealth. But not once did any of you ask, "How are you today?" He turned to Ruth. Only one person did. Ruth sat quietly, tears in her eyes. Chief Douglas looked back at the screen one last time, then back at his family. "Tomorrow morning, the will shall be read, and you'll receive exactly what your hearts deserve." Then he turned and walked away. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion was electric, thick with dread, shame, and silent anger. Nobody slept the night before. Nancy had locked herself in her room, sobbing into her pillows, calling Khaled, but he wasn't answering. Lillian spent most of the night pacing her balcony with a wine glass in hand, her mind racing through failed strategies and broken pride. Franklin. He didn't speak to anyone. Not even his mother. By 10 a.m., the family gathered in the living room once again. This time, there was no acting, no pretending, no playing perfect. Chief Douglas entered the room, flanked by Barrister Williams and Dr. Phillip. He walked tall, strong, alive. Ruth followed behind him quietly, her head slightly bowed, still wearing her simple wrapper and headscarf. The same woman who had nursed him while others plotted his end. Chief Douglas sat down and faced his family. "Thank you all for coming," he said calmly. "Today the weight of truth shall settle where it belongs." Barrister Williams opened a thick brown envelope and pulled out a freshly signed document. "This," he announced, "is Chief Douglas's revised and final will, written during the period he was presumed ill." He adjusted his glasses and began. "To Madam Nancy." Nancy looked up, eyes puffy, makeup half worn. "For the disrespect, betrayal, and mockery of marriage, you are entitled to nothing. No land, no shares, no financial assets. Your marriage will be legally reviewed and annulled based on infidelity and negligence." Nancy gasped. "Chief, please!" Douglas didn't blink. "To Madam Lillian?" Lillian sat upright, jaw clenched. "For your attempt to hijack the company and dismantle its legacy, you are also entitled to nothing. Your control over any business assets is hereby revoked. Your boardroom games are over." Lillian looked away, her pride shattered. "To Franklin?" He shifted uncomfortably. "For arrogance, entitlement, and greed. You are stripped of all inheritance. You may seek employment elsewhere, not in any company bearing my name." Franklin stood to protest, but Barrister Williams raised a hand. "Sit. This will is legally binding and already registered with the Federal Probate Registry." Then came the final announcement. "To Madam Ruth." Everyone turned. Ruth froze. "For your unwavering love, loyalty, and the selfless care you showed not only in my strength, but in my weakness, you are now the legal heir to all my remaining assets. This includes the main estate, all controlling shares in Douglas Holdings, the Lekki Hotel, the Abuja apartment, and 75% of all liquid financial assets." The room fell into stunned silence. Ruth looked at Chief Douglas, eyes wide. I never asked for—" He held her hand. "You didn't have to ask. You earned it with your heart." And in that moment, the real legacy of Chief Douglas was no longer measured in buildings or bank accounts, but in the quiet dignity of a woman who never gave up on love. The news traveled faster than wildfire. By afternoon, headlines across social media read, "Billionaire Chief Douglas reveals he was never sick. Disinherits 2. Wives hands everything to first wife. Young wife Nancy caught cheating. Loses everything in shocking family drama. Ruth becomes sole heir to Douglas Empire." But inside the mansion, it wasn't just news. It was chaos. Nancy screamed and slammed the door to her room, tossing expensive wigs and handbags into a suitcase she could no longer claim as hers. "He can't do this to me," she cried. "I gave him my youth, my body." No one answered. Even her maid had disappeared. Lillian remained cold, stoic. She packed her designer handbags neatly, clicked her heels into her suitcase, and wore her pain like perfume. Franklin stormed into the hallway. "You think this is fair, huh? After all I've done?" Chief Douglas stood at the top of the stairs. "You did nothing but embarrass me," he said calmly. "You tore down what I spent 4 decades building in a matter of weeks. You thought you were the heir, but you were never even a student." Franklin's face flushed with shame. "You're throwing me out, just like that?" "I'm setting you free," Chief Douglas replied. "Free to build your own name, if you ever learn how." Franklin dropped his bag and stormed out of the mansion. Nancy tried to appeal to Ruth later that night. She knocked softly on her door, eyes swollen from crying. "Please, Mama Ruth, talk to him. Tell him not to annul the marriage. Let me stay. I made a mistake, but I'm sorry." Ruth looked at her through the half-open door. Her voice was steady. "When he was weak and needed comfort, where were you?" Nancy couldn't answer. "Go, Nancy," Ruth said gently. "Find your peace, but not here." Nancy sank to her knees and wept in silence. By morning, 2 black SUVs arrived at the mansion. Security escorted Nancy and Lillian out. No screaming, no scandal. Just silence and pride mixed with shame. Chief Douglas stood by the window watching them leave. Ruth came beside him, holding a cup of tea. "Did it have to end this way?" she asked quietly. Douglas sipped slowly and replied, "Sometimes the only way to see clearly is through pain." They watched as the last car drove away. For the first time in months, the mansion felt clean. Not just in space, but in spirit. No more whispers in the hallway. No more fake kisses. No more vultures circling. Only truth and peace. But the real transformation was yet to come. Ruth had no idea that Chief Douglas wasn't just leaving her with wealth. He was preparing to hand her something even greater. 2 weeks had passed since the storm cleared from Chief Douglas's mansion. The corridors that once echoed with hushed plotting now hummed with soft peace. Staff smiled again. The gates no longer opened for shady visitors or secret lovers. And Ruth walked with the quiet strength of a woman who had endured fire and came out pure gold. But one thing still puzzled her. Douglas had been unusually quiet lately. He spent more time in the garden, reading, writing in an old journal, and making long phone calls. One morning he called her into the study. She entered, wiping flour from her hands. She had been baking bread, the way she used to when they were poor. He looked up, smiled, and pointed to the seat across from him. "Sit, my queen." Ruth chuckled. "Queen, this your mouth, eh? What have you done again?" He handed her a file. "Read it." She opened the folder, and her breath caught. "CEO appointment letter?" She looked up. Douglas nodded. "Yes, I'm retiring officially. Stepping down from the company, the board, everything. Ruth, I want you to take over." She blinked fast. "Me? No? Douglas, no. I didn't go to business school. I can't." He raised a hand. "You've run a home with nothing but grit and prayer. You've led with love, not ego. You've known poverty and wealth. You've been faithful in pain. If anyone is worthy to lead, it's you." She sat still, overwhelmed. He stood up, walked over, and held her hand. "Don't worry. You'll have a board, a team. Barrister Williams will guide you. I just want the name Douglas Holdings to be remembered for love, not just profit." Tears slipped from her eyes. "I don't even have a degree," Douglas smiled. "You have something rarer, wisdom and loyalty. We'll send you for training, yes, but your heart? It's already CEO material." Later that week, Ruth entered the headquarters of Douglas Holdings as the new leader. Employees stood and applauded as she walked into the boardroom. Simple yet elegant. A quiet storm in wrapper and head tie. One of the elderly staff whispered, "She's the reason the company is still standing." And it was true. Under her watch, the culture of the company changed. Salaries were reviewed. Old workers that had been unfairly sacked returned. Departments were restructured. And for the first time in years, Douglas Holdings began to feel human again. Chief Douglas sat at home, smiling at the morning news as he watched his wife, no, his queen, being interviewed on national television. "We rise by lifting others," she said, "and we lead by remembering those who stood with us when we were nothing." He turned off the TV, leaned back in his chair and whispered, "Now I can rest." Because in the end, the wealth didn't matter. Legacy did. And he had finally given it to someone who wouldn't trade it for the world. The end. If this story left you speechless, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Folktales by Olivia. Because in life, the deepest betrayals often come from those who call us family.